Margaret Thompson had been awake since 5:30 that morning. It wasn't that she needed to be up that early anymore. After 40 years of teaching third graders, her body still operated on that old school schedule. Even though she'd been retired for 8 years now, some habits just stuck around like old friends. She stood in her small kitchen, the morning sun filtering through the yellow curtains her daughter had hung last Christmas. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed, filling the room with that familiar warm smell. Margaret pulled her favorite mug from the cabinet, the one that said "World's Best Teacher" in faded letters. Her late husband Robert had given it to her 23 years ago. The handle had a small chip in it now, but she'd never replace it. Today was Thursday, which meant it was pension day. Every month, like clockwork, that check arrived in her mailbox. It wasn't a fortune by any means, but combined with Robert's Social Security that still came to her, it kept her comfortable. She could pay her bills, buy her groceries, and even treat herself to lunch at the diner once a week. Margaret finished her coffee and toast, then headed to her bedroom to get ready. She chose a simple floral blouse and her navy slacks, the nice ones she saved for going out. Some folks her age had stopped caring what they wore to run errands, but not Margaret. Her mother had always told her that how you presented yourself to the world mattered. Respect yourself and others will follow suit. At least that's what she'd always believed. By 9 o'clock she was ready to go. She picked up her purse from the hallway table, the brown leather one Robert had saved up to buy her for their 30th anniversary. The leather was soft and worn now, creased in familiar places from years of use. Inside was her checkbook, her wallet with her driver's license and bank card, and the pension check she needed to deposit. Margaret locked her front door and made her way down the 3 steps from her porch, holding the railing carefully. Her knees weren't what they used to be. The walk to the bus stop took about 10 minutes and she enjoyed it. The neighborhood was quiet this time of morning, with most folks already at work. Mrs. Chen next door was watering her garden and waved. Margaret waved back, calling out a good morning. The bus arrived right on schedule. Margaret climbed aboard, tapped her senior card, and found a seat near the middle. She liked watching the city go by through the window. Los Angeles had changed so much over the decades she'd lived here. Buildings had gone up, old stores had closed, new ones had opened. But some things stayed the same. People still rushed about their business, still smiled at strangers sometimes, still lived their lives. The Pacific Trust Bank was downtown, about a 20-minute ride from her neighborhood. She'd been banking there for 22 years, ever since Robert got transferred to the post office branch nearby. It had been convenient then, and she'd just kept going there after he passed. The folks there knew her, or at least they used to. Seemed like the staff changed every few years now. Margaret got off at her stop and walked the half-block to the bank. It was a nice building, modern-looking with big glass windows and that polished stone facade. She pulled open the heavy door and stepped inside, grateful for the cool air conditioning. The Los Angeles heat was already building outside. The bank was busier than usual. Must be because it was near the middle of the month when lots of folks got their checks. Margaret counted about 8 or 9 people in line ahead of her. She sighed quietly and took her place at the back, shifting her purse to her other shoulder. The bank had that particular smell banks always seem to have, something like paper and air conditioning and floor polish. Soft music played from speakers somewhere, something instrumental that probably cost a fortune in licensing fees but that nobody really listened to. The walls had posters about savings accounts and home loans, all featuring smiling people who looked nothing like anyone Margaret had ever seen in real life. She waited patiently as the line slowly moved forward. One person finished, then another. Margaret didn't mind waiting. She'd learned patience over 4 decades of dealing with energetic 8-year-olds. This was nothing compared to lunch duty on a rainy day. Behind her, she heard the door open again. Someone else joining the line. Margaret didn't turn around. She was watching the tellers, trying to figure out which one she might end up with. There were 3 windows open. She recognized the older woman on the left, Helen. She was nice, always asked about Margaret's daughter. The other 2 were younger, and Margaret didn't know them well. The man who'd come in behind her was dressed casually, she noticed from the corner of her eye. Jeans and a t-shirt, baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses even though he was indoors. Probably someone trying to avoid attention, maybe. Los Angeles was like that. Lots of people thinking they were important enough that folks would bother them. Margaret moved forward in line again. Just 4 people ahead of her now. She opened her purse and pulled out the check, looking at it one more time. Same amount as always, same format, same everything. She'd deposit it and take out $200 in cash. That would cover her groceries for the week and leave a little extra for the electric bill that was coming due. The woman at the front of the line seemed to be having some complicated transaction. She had a stack of papers and was pointing at something on one of them. The teller kept typing on her computer, frowning at the screen. This was going to take a while. Margaret glanced at her watch. 9:15. She had plenty of time. No rush at all. After the bank, she might walk over to that little bookstore on 5th Street, the one that sold used paperbacks. She'd finished the mystery novel she'd been reading and needed something new. 3 people ahead now. The complicated transaction finally finished, and the woman gathered her papers and left. The line moved more smoothly after that. Margaret found herself getting closer to the front. She could see the tellers more clearly now. The young woman on the right, the one with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, was free. She looked to be in her 20s, maybe 30 at most, 2 people ahead. Then one. Margaret took a deep breath. Such a simple thing, going to the bank. She'd done it hundreds of times. But something felt different today, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what. Maybe it was just the crowd, or the heat outside, or the way that young teller was staring at her phone between customers instead of looking up. The person in front of Margaret finished their business. The teller called out, "Next," in a voice that sounded more bored than welcoming. Margaret stepped forward to the window, setting her purse on the counter. She smiled at the young woman whose name tag read, Jessica. "Good morning," Margaret said, her voice friendly and warm. "I'd like to make a deposit, please." Jessica barely glanced up from her computer screen. She made a small noise that might have been a greeting but sounded more like a grunt. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, finishing whatever she'd been typing. Margaret waited, her smile fading just a little. She pulled the check from her purse and placed it on the counter, along with her deposit slip that she'd already filled out at home. This was where everything was about to change, though Margaret didn't know it yet. Behind her in line, the man in the baseball cap had been watching. He'd seen how the teller greeted the previous customers, all smiles and pleasantries. He'd noticed how that had changed when Margaret approached the window, and he was paying very close attention now. Jessica finally looked up from her computer, but not at Margaret's face. Her eyes went straight to the check on the counter. She picked it up between 2 fingers like it might be dirty, holding it up to the light. "Pension check," Jessica said flatly. It wasn't a question, more like an observation delivered with 0 interest. "Yes, dear," Margaret replied, keeping her voice pleasant despite the young woman's tone. "Same as every month. I'd also like to withdraw $200 in cash, please." Jessica turned the check over, examining the back, then the front again. Her eyes narrowed. She typed something into her computer, then looked at the screen, then back at the check, then at Margaret, really looking at her for the first time. But it wasn't a friendly look. It was the kind of look that made Margaret's stomach tighten with an old familiar discomfort. "I'm going to need to see your ID," Jessica said. "Of course." Margaret had expected this. She opened her wallet and pulled out her driver's license, sliding it across the counter. She'd renewed it just last year, so the photo was relatively recent. Though she always thought they made her look older than she felt, Jessica picked up the license and stared at it for what seemed like a very long time. She looked at the photo, then at Margaret, then back at the photo. She was frowning now, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is you?" Jessica asked. Margaret felt heat rising in her cheeks. "Yes, of course it's me. That's my license." "The photo looks different." "Well, photos never look quite like real life, do they?" Margaret tried to keep her voice light, though something cold was settling in her chest. "But that's definitely me. You can check the birth date, the address, everything." Jessica didn't respond. Instead, she picked up her phone at the desk and pressed a button. "Derek, can you come over here for a minute?" Margaret's hands tightened on the edge of the counter. Behind her, she could feel the presence of the other people in Lynn. Were they watching? Could they hear this? Her face felt hot now, embarrassment creeping up her neck. A young man in a crisp white shirt and navy tie appeared from somewhere behind the teller windows. He couldn't have been more than 35, with perfectly styled hair and that kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His name tag identified him as Derek Patterson, assistant manager. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked Jessica, not even glancing at Margaret yet. "This check," Jessica said, handing it to him. And the ID, I'm not sure they match. Derek took both items and examined them. Now he did look at Margaret, and she saw it immediately in his eyes. That look, that assumption. She'd seen it countless times over her 73 years, though she'd hoped things had gotten better. Clearly they hadn't, not everywhere, not for everyone. "Ma'am," Derek said, and the way he said ma'am wasn't respectful. It was condescending, like he was talking to a child he suspected of lying. "This is your check?" "Yes," Margaret said, and now her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "It's my monthly pension. I deposit it here every month. I've been banking at this branch for over 20 years. Uh-huh. Derek turned the check over in his hands. "And where did you get this check exactly?" The question hit Margaret like a slap. "Where did I get it?" "It comes in the mail. It's my pension from the school district. I taught for 40 years. "Right." Derek's tone suggested he didn't believe a word she was saying. "And you're saying this arrives every month?" "Yes, I just told you that." Margaret could feel her hands starting to shake. She gripped her purse tighter, trying to steady herself. The same check, the same amount, deposited the same way. "I don't understand what the problem is." Derek made a show of examining the check more closely, holding it up to the light just as Jessica had done. Other people in line were definitely watching now. Margaret could feel their eyes on her back. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to be anywhere but standing here being interrogated like some kind of criminal. "This check just looks suspicious to me," Derek announced, loud enough that his voice carried across the bank lobby. "We've been having problems with fraudulent checks lately. I'm sure you understand we need to be careful." "Fraudulent?" Margaret's voice cracked on the word. "That's my check. My name is right there, Margaret Louise Thompson. My address is right there. Everything is exactly as it should be." "Let me see that deposit slip," Derek said, taking it from the counter. He compared it to her driver's license, making a big production of checking every detail. "You say you've been banking here for 20 years? 22 years, Margaret corrected, her dignity fighting to stay intact even as her eyes began to sting with threatening tears. "Then you should be in our system." Derek walked back behind the counter and leaned over Jessica's computer terminal, typing rapidly. Margaret watched as they both stared at the screen, whispering to each other. Every few seconds one of them would glance up at her, then back at the screen. The man behind Margaret in line shifted his weight. She heard it, the subtle movement that said he was paying attention. She wished he wasn't. She wished no one was. She wished she'd just stayed home today. Derek straightened up and walked back to the window, but he didn't hand Margaret her check or her ID back. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest, a position that clearly said he was in charge here and she was not. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to verify this check before we can process it," he said. "Verify it? How long will that take?" "Could be a few minutes, could be longer. I'll need to call the issuing institution, confirm the check is legitimate, make sure there's no fraud involved." That word again. Fraud. Margaret felt something break inside her, some piece of the armor she'd built up over the years. "I'm not trying to commit fraud. This is my money. My pension that I earned after 40 years of teaching children. I've never done anything dishonest in my life." "I'm sure you haven't," Derek said, but his tone suggested the exact opposite. "However, bank policy requires us to verify suspicious transactions. I'm going to need you to step aside while I make some calls." "Step aside?" Margaret looked around. "Step aside where?" "Just over there by the ropes." Derek gestured vaguely toward the area near the entrance where the line barriers were set up. "This might take a while and we need to keep the line moving." Margaret felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "You want me to just stand there? While everyone watches? While you call and check up on me like I'm some kind of thief? It's just procedure, ma'am." Derek's voice had taken on an edge now, irritation creeping in. "We do this for all suspicious transactions. Do you?" A new voice cut through the conversation. Deep, calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Do you really do this for everyone?" Both Derek and Jessica looked past Margaret. Their expressions changed instantly, shock replacing the bureaucratic indifference. Jessica's mouth actually fell open. Margaret turned to see who had spoken. It was the man who'd been standing behind her in line. He'd removed his sunglasses and baseball cap, and she could see his face now. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't quite place it. He was tall, muscular, with a shaved head and intense eyes that were currently fixed on Derek with laser focus. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is between me and this customer," Derek said, but his voice had lost its confidence. He seemed rattled. "No," the man said quietly. "It's not. Because I've been standing in this line for the last 15 minutes and I watched how you treated the 3 customers before this lady. You didn't ask them where they got their checks. You didn't hold their money up to the light like it might be counterfeit. You smiled at them. You processed their transactions quickly and professionally. But this woman comes to your window and suddenly everything is suspicious." Margaret's heart was pounding. She didn't know this man, didn't understand why he was defending her, but she felt a surge of gratitude so strong it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Sir, I really don't think," Derek started. "I've been watching," the man interrupted, his voice still calm but growing firmer. The older gentleman 2 people ahead. He deposited a check for twice this amount. "You barely glanced at it. The woman right before?" She withdrew $500 in cash. "You handed it over with a smile. But now we have a problem? Now we need to verify?" People in line were pulling out their phones now. Margaret could see it from the corner of her eye. They were recording. This was really happening, and it was happening in front of an audience. Derek's face had turned red. "Look, I don't know who you think you are. I know exactly who I am," the man said. "The question is, do you know what you're doing? Do you understand how you're treating this woman right now?" Jessica had gone pale. She was staring at the man like she'd seen a ghost, and she was tugging on Derek's sleeve, whispering urgently in his ear. Derek's eyes went wide as recognition finally dawned, but the damage was done. Margaret was still standing there, her check and ID held hostage, her dignity in tatters, her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to make them stop. She'd come to the bank to do something simple, something she'd done hundreds of times before, and now she was standing in the middle of a scene, exposed and humiliated in front of strangers, being treated like a criminal for the crime of depositing her own money. The man stepped closer to the counter, his presence commanding attention without any aggression. "I think," he said quietly, "we need to talk to your manager. The actual manager, not the assistant. Right now." Derek stood frozen for a moment, his face cycling through shades of red and white. The entire bank had gone quiet. Even the soft instrumental music seemed to have faded into nothing. Everyone was watching now, phones held up, capturing every second. Margaret wanted to shrink into herself, to become invisible. But the man beside her, this stranger who'd stepped in when no one else had, placed a gentle hand near her elbow. Not touching, not presuming, just there, a gesture of support. "Ma'am," he said, turning to her with kind eyes. "Are you all right?" Margaret couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up with emotion, a mixture of humiliation, anger, and now this unexpected kindness from someone she didn't even know. She managed a small shake of her head. "This isn't right," he said, and though his voice was soft when he spoke to her, there was steel underneath it. "What they're doing to you isn't right, and it's not going to continue." "I just want to deposit my check," Margaret whispered, and hearing herself say it, the simplicity of what she'd wanted made her eyes fill with tears. "I just wanted to deposit my check and go home." The man's jaw tightened. He turned back to Derek, and now his expression had hardened. "Get your manager, now." "Sir, if you could just calm down." Derek started, trying to regain some control of the situation. "I am completely calm," the man replied, and it was true. His voice was steady, measured, controlled. "But I'm also not leaving until someone with actual authority addresses what just happened here. This woman has been accused of fraud, publicly humiliated, and treated with blatant disrespect. So I'll say it one more time. Get your manager." Jessica was frantically whispering to Derek, her eyes darting between the man and her computer screen and back again. She'd clearly figured out who he was, and the panic on her face was growing by the second. Derek finally seemed to catch onto the severity of the situation, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. I'll go get Mrs. Hernandez," he stammered, backing away from the window. Just wait here." "Oh, we're not going anywhere," the man assured him. Derek practically ran toward the back offices, leaving Jessica standing alone at the window. She wouldn't make eye contact with anyone, just stared at her computer screen like it might save her somehow. Margaret felt lightheaded. The whole situation had spiraled so far beyond what should have been a simple 10-minute bank visit. She clutched her purse tighter, her lifeline, the leather warm and familiar under her trembling fingers. "Would you like to sit down?" the man asked her gently. "There's a bench over there by the window." "No," Margaret said, finding her voice. "No, I'll stand." I won't let them. She couldn't finish the sentence, but he seemed to understand. You're stronger than they deserve, he said with a slight smile, but the offer stands if you change your mind. Other people in the line had broken formation now. A few had left, uncomfortable with the tension. Others had moved closer, curious, supportive. An older Hispanic man near the front of the line caught Margaret's eye and nodded at her, a gesture of solidarity. A young black woman was openly recording on her phone, her expression angry. This is messed up, the young woman said to no one in particular. Completely messed up. Margaret heard murmurs of agreement from others. It helped, knowing that at least some people saw what was wrong here, that she wasn't crazy or oversensitive, that this was as inappropriate as it felt. The minutes ticked by. 3 minutes, 5, 7. Margaret's feet were starting to hurt from standing, but she refused to sit. The man stayed beside her, a silent presence. He'd put his sunglasses in his pocket and held his baseball cap in his hands, and Margaret finally got a good look at him. He looked familiar, she thought. Something about his face, his presence. Had she seen him on television, maybe? In a movie? She didn't watch much television these days. Mostly just the news and her cooking shows, but there was definitely something. I'm sorry, he said, noticing her looking at him. I should have introduced myself properly. I'm Vincent, but most people just call me Vin. Margaret, she replied softly. Margaret Thompson. It's nice to meet you, Margaret. I just wish it were under better circumstances. You didn't have to do this, she said. Step in, I mean. Most people just look away. Vin shook his head. My mother raised me better than that. She always told me that if you see someone being treated wrong and you do nothing, you're part of the problem. And I saw what happened here. I saw how differently they treated you compared to everyone else. That's not acceptable. Before Margaret could respond, a door opened in the back of the bank. A woman in her 50s emerged, wearing a sharp navy suit and an expression that was already concerned before she even reached the lobby. Derek trailed behind her like a guilty puppy. The woman, who must be Mrs. Hernandez, took in the scene quickly. Her eyes moved from Jessica at the window to Derek, to Vin, and finally to Margaret. Margaret saw something shift in her expression when she looked at her. Something that might have been recognition or understanding, or maybe just professional alarm. Good morning, Mrs. Hernandez said, her voice professionally pleasant but tight. I'm Patricia Hernandez, the branch manager. I understand there's been some kind of issue. Yes, Vin said before anyone else could speak. There's been a very serious issue. And I think everyone in this bank needs to hear what happened here. Patricia glanced around at the assembled crowd, at the phone still recording, and Margaret saw her take a deep breath. Perhaps we should discuss this in my office. No, Vin said firmly. What happened to Mrs. Thompson happened publicly in front of all these people. The conversation about it should happen publicly too. Patricia's professional mask cracked just slightly. Sir, I'm sure we can resolve this more comfortably in private. Comfortable for who? Vin asked. Because Mrs. Thompson wasn't comfortable when your employees accused her of fraud in front of everyone. She wasn't comfortable when they made her stand aside like a criminal while they verified her check. So no, we're not taking this somewhere private where it can be swept under the rug. Margaret's heart was hammering. Part of her wanted to just take her check and leave, to forget this whole horrible morning. But another part of her, a part she'd kept buried for a long time under layers of just getting through life, was angry. Really, truly angry. I've been banking here for 22 years, Margaret said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. 22 years. I know my account number by heart. I know which teller windows get the afternoon sun. I was here when they remodeled the lobby 5 years ago. I've never, not once, had a problem with a transaction. Not one bounced check, not one overdraft, nothing. My record is spotless, Patricia nodded, her expression growing more serious. Mrs. Thompson, I apologize. Let me look into your account right away. I watched 3 customers get helped before her, Vin continued, his voice carrying across the quiet bank. An older white gentleman who deposited a check for over $3,000. Your teller barely looked at it. A middle-aged white woman who withdrew $500 in cash. Processed in under 2 minutes with a smile. A young white man who had some complicated transaction with multiple forms. Your assistant manager helped him personally, patiently, professionally. Patricia's face had gone still, but her eyes were sharp, taking in every word. Then Mrs. Thompson came to the window, Vin said. She had a pension check for far less than any of those amounts. A check she deposits every single month. And suddenly there's a problem. Suddenly the check looks suspicious. Suddenly we need to verify, to investigate, to question where she got this money. Your teller and your assistant manager treated her like a criminal. They held her ID and her check hostage. They made her stand aside while other customers were served. They humiliated her in front of a room full of strangers. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's jaw was tight, her hands clasped in front of her. Derek had gone pale and Jessica looked like she might cry. "Mrs. Thompson," Patricia said carefully, "if you would allow me to verify your account information." "Verify?" Margaret's voice broke. "That's all anyone wants to do. Verify me, check up on me. Make sure I'm not lying, not cheating, not stealing. I taught third graders for 40 years. I helped shape young minds, dried tears, celebrated victories, and guided children through some of the most important years of their development. I've paid taxes my entire life. I've never been arrested, never committed a crime, never hurt anyone. And I came into this bank today, a bank where I've been a loyal customer for over 2 decades, to deposit a check I earned through a lifetime of hard work. And I was treated like a thief." The tears were flowing now, and Margaret didn't bother to wipe them away. Let them see, she thought. Let them see what they've done. Patricia's expression had crumbled. She moved to the nearest computer terminal and began typing rapidly, Derek hovering nervously behind her. The bank remained silent except for the clicking of keys. Everyone waited. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, Patricia looked up from the screen. Her face had changed completely. Professional concern replaced by something that looked like genuine regret. "Maybe even shame, Mrs. Thompson," she said quietly. "You've been a customer here since June 2003. Your account is in perfect standing. You've never had a returned check, never had an overdraft, never had any issues whatsoever. You deposit the same pension check on the same day every month, and you have for years. Everything about your transaction today was completely routine and absolutely legitimate." The words hung in the air. Confirmation of what everyone already knew, what should have been obvious from the start. "So why?" Vin asked, his voice deadly quiet. Was she treated the way she was? Patricia Hernandez closed her eyes for a brief moment, and when she opened them again, Margaret could see that she understood exactly what Vin was asking. There was no good answer because the truth was ugly and everyone in that bank knew it. "Mrs. Thompson," Patricia said, her voice heavy, "I cannot tell you how deeply sorry I am. What happened here today should never have occurred. Please allow me to process your transaction immediately, and I want to personally handle it for you." "That's a start," Vin said, "but sorry isn't enough." "Not nearly enough," Patricia nodded slowly. She turned to Derek, and the look she gave him could have frozen fire. "Derek, my office now. Jessica, you as well." "But Mrs. Hernandez," Derek started. "Now," Patricia repeated, and there was no room for argument in her tone. She looked back at Margaret. "Mrs. Thompson, please come with me to window 3. Helen is one of our most experienced tellers, and I'd like her to assist while I oversee your transaction personally." Margaret glanced at Vin, uncertain. He gave her an encouraging nod. "I'll be right here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Margaret made her way to window 3 on shaky legs. Helen, the older teller she'd recognized earlier, smiled at her warmly. There was sympathy in her eyes and maybe a little anger too, but directed at her colleagues rather than at Margaret. "Mrs. Thompson," Helen said softly, "I'm so sorry about what happened. Let's get this taken care of for you, okay?" Patricia stood beside Helen, watching as the teller processed Margaret's check. It took less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That's all it should have taken from the start. The check was deposited, $200 in cash was counted out and handed to Margaret, and a receipt was printed. "Mrs. Thompson," Patricia said as Helen finished, "I'm waiving all fees on your account for the next 12 months. It's inadequate, I know, but it's something I can do immediately." Margaret accepted the cash and the receipt, tucking them into her purse with trembling hands. The money felt heavy, tainted somehow by what she'd had to go through to get it. "Additionally," Patricia continued, "I'm going to make sure this incident is reported to our regional office. What happened here today violated not just our customer service standards, but basic human decency. Those employees will face consequences." "What kind of consequences?" The question came from the young woman who'd been recording, who'd moved closer to hear the conversation. Patricia looked at her, then at the phone still recording, and seemed to make a decision. That will be determined through our internal investigation process. But I can tell you that discriminatory behavior is taken extremely seriously by Pacific Trust Bank. We have zero tolerance policies for this kind of treatment. Do you, though? Another voice from the crowd, an older black man. Because it happened right here, right in front of everybody. Makes me wonder how many times it happens when nobody's watching. How many times it happens when there's no camera phones around. The murmur of agreement from the gathered customers made it clear this resonated with more than just a few people. Margaret saw Patricia's shoulders sag slightly under the weight of the moment. "You're right," Patricia said, and to her credit, she didn't try to deflect or make excuses. "You're absolutely right, and that's something we need to address systematically, not just in response to this incident. This can't be allowed to happen again. Not here, not anywhere." Vin had moved closer during this exchange, standing near enough that Margaret could feel his supportive presence without him crowding her. "Mrs. Thompson deserves more than apologies and waived fees," he said. "She deserves acknowledgement of exactly what happened here and why." Patricia turned to face him directly, and Margaret saw her take a breath, steeling herself. "Mr. Diesel," she said, and that's when Margaret finally placed him. Vin Diesel, the actor. That's why he looked familiar. "You're right. Mrs. Thompson deserves that and more." Patricia turned back to Margaret, and when she spoke next, her voice was clear enough for everyone in the bank to hear. "Mrs. Thompson, what happened to you today was racial discrimination. There's no other word for it, no way to sugarcoat it or explain it away. You were treated with suspicion and disrespect because of the color of your skin, and that is absolutely unacceptable. On behalf of Pacific Trust Bank, I apologize, but I know that's not enough. Words can never undo the harm that was done here today. The bank was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Several people were openly crying now, including Helen the teller. Margaret felt her own tears flowing again, but they were different this time. There was still pain, still humiliation, but there was also something else. Relief, maybe. Validation. Someone in authority had said it out loud, had named the thing that people usually danced around with careful language and polite euphemisms. "I'm 73 years old," Margaret said, her voice shaking but clear. "I've lived through segregation, through the civil rights movement, through decades of being told things were getting better. And they have in some ways. But then something like this happens and it reminds me that we still have so far to go. I came here to deposit my pension check. That's all. Just deposit a check. And I was made to feel like a criminal in front of all these people." "I know," Patricia said quietly, "and there's nothing I can say that will make that okay. But I want you to know that this will not be swept under the rug. Derek and Jessica will be held accountable. And beyond that, I'm going to implement mandatory bias training for every employee at this branch, myself included. We're going to review our procedures to make sure there are safeguards against this kind of discrimination, and I'm going to recommend to our regional office that this becomes a system-wide initiative." "Training is good," Vin said, "but it can't just be a checkbox exercise. It needs to be meaningful, ongoing, with real accountability." "Agreed," Patricia said. She looked at the assembled crowd, at all the phones still recording. "I want everyone here to know that if you experience or witness discrimination at any Pacific Trust Bank location, we have a customer advocacy hotline. I'm going to make sure that number is prominently displayed at every branch, and I'm going to make sure reports are taken seriously and acted upon swiftly." The young woman with her phone spoke up again. "You know this is going viral, right? This whole thing. It's already being uploaded, shared. People need to see what happened here." Patricia nodded. "I understand. And honestly, maybe that's what needs to happen. Maybe public accountability is the only thing that drives real change." She looked at Margaret. "Mrs. Thompson, if you choose to share your story, you have every right to do so. And if there's anything else I can do, anything at all, please let me know." Margaret didn't know what to say. Part of her just wanted to leave, to go home, to try to forget this morning had ever happened. But another part of her knew that this moment mattered, that what happened next could make a difference not just for her, but for other people who might face the same treatment. "I just want to be treated like a human being," she said finally. "I want to be able to walk into a bank, into a store, into anywhere, and not have to worry that I'm going to be looked at as suspicious just because of how I look. I want that for me, and I want that for my daughter and for my grandchildren. That's what I want. That's what you deserve," Vin said firmly. "That's what everyone deserves." Patricia excused herself to deal with Derek and Jessica, promising to follow up with Margaret personally within the week. As she walked away, the crowd in the bank began to disperse slowly. Several people stopped to speak to Margaret, to offer words of support, to thank her for standing her ground. The older black man shook her hand and told her she reminded him of his mother. The young woman asked if it was okay to share the video she'd recorded, and Margaret, after a moment's hesitation, said yes. Helen at the window reached across and gently squeezed Margaret's hand. "You're a strong woman," she said. "What they did to you was wrong, and I'm glad someone finally said it out loud." Soon it was just Margaret and Vin standing in the now half-empty bank. The morning had worn on, and what should have taken 10 minutes had stretched into nearly an hour. Margaret felt exhausted, emotionally drained in a way that made her bones ache. "Can I walk you out?" Vin asked gently. Margaret nodded, grateful. They made their way to the door, stepping out into the Los Angeles sunshine that seemed too bright, too cheerful for how she felt inside. "Thank you," Margaret said, turning to face him. "You didn't have to do any of that. You could have just looked away like most people do." "I couldn't," Vin said simply. "My mother, she raised me and my siblings by herself. Worked multiple jobs, dealt with discrimination and disrespect more times than I can count. She taught me that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit. She taught me to stand up, to speak up even when it's uncomfortable." He paused, his eyes kind. "She would have liked you. You held on to your dignity even when they were trying to take it away. That takes real strength." Margaret felt tears threatening again. "I don't feel very strong right now." "Strength isn't about not feeling hurt or afraid," Vin said. "It's about standing up even when you do feel those things. And you did that today." They stood there for a moment in the sunlight. An elderly black woman and a famous actor, brought together by circumstance and injustice and the choice to not look away from wrong when it was right in front of them. "Will you be okay?" Vin asked. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" "No, thank you. The bus stop is just down the block. I'll be fine." Margaret managed a small smile. "I've been taking care of myself for a long time now." "I don't doubt it," Vin said. He pulled out his phone. "Would you mind if I gave you my assistant's contact information? I'd like to follow up in a few days. Make sure the bank follows through on everything they promised. And if they don't, well, I have a fairly large platform I can use to hold them accountable." Margaret agreed, and they exchanged information. Then Vin did something unexpected. He gave her a hug, warm and genuine, the kind of hug that felt like family. "You take care of yourself, Margaret Thompson," he said. "And remember, what happened today wasn't your fault. You did nothing wrong. Nothing at all." Margaret watched Vin walk away, his tall figure disappearing down the street, and for a moment she just stood there trying to process everything that had happened. The morning sun was warm on her face, and the city moved around her with its usual Friday energy. People rushing to appointments, cars honking, the distant sound of construction. Life going on as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. She made her way to the bus stop, her legs feeling heavier than they had that morning. The bench was empty, and she sank onto it gratefully. Her purse sat on her lap, and she could feel the weight of the cash inside it, the $200 she'd come for. Such a simple thing. Such an ordinary transaction that had become extraordinary in all the worst ways. The bus arrived, and Margaret climbed aboard, finding a seat by the window. As the city rolled past, she found herself replaying every moment. Jessica's dismissive tone, Derek's accusations, the way they'd made her feel small and suspicious and wrong, but also Vin's voice, steady and sure, refusing to let it slide. The way Patricia had finally acknowledged the truth. The support from strangers who could have just looked away. When Margaret got home, she locked the door behind her and headed straight for her kitchen. She put on the kettle for tea, needing something familiar and comforting. While she waited for the water to boil, she sat at her small dining table and just breathed. Her phone rang, startling her. It was her daughter Cheryl, who lived 2 hours away in San Diego. "Mama?" Cheryl's voice was tight with concern. "Mama, are you okay? I just saw a video online and I think it was you at a bank." Margaret's heart sank. Already. It had already spread that quickly. "I'm fine, baby. I'm home now." What happened? The video shows some kind of confrontation. And is that Vin Diesel? "Mama, what happened?" So Margaret told her. The whole story, from walking into the bank to standing on the sidewalk afterward. Cheryl listened, and Margaret could hear her daughter's breathing getting faster, could almost see her getting angry the way she did when something wasn't right. "I'm coming up there," Cheryl said when Margaret finished. "I'm getting in the car right now." "Cheryl, no, you don't need to do that. I'm okay." "You're not okay. How could you be okay?" "Mama, they accused you of fraud. They humiliated you in public. You can't be okay." "I'm not okay," Margaret admitted quietly. "But I'm home, and I'm safe, and you coming up here won't change what happened. I just need some time to process it all." They talked for another 20 minutes, Cheryl insisting she'd drive up that weekend, Margaret finally agreeing because she knew her daughter needed to do something. When they hung up, Margaret made her tea and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood go about its day. By evening, her phone had rung 6 more times. Friends who'd seen the video online, her former teaching colleague Beverly, horrified and angry, her neighbor Mrs. Chen offering to bring over dinner, even Pastor Williams from her church wanting to check on her and let her know the congregation was praying for her. The next morning, Margaret woke to discover the video had indeed gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. News outlets were picking it up. Her phone rang continuously until she finally turned off the ringer. She didn't want to talk to reporters, didn't want to be the face of anything. She just wanted to be Margaret Thompson, retired teacher, not Margaret Thompson, victim of bank discrimination. But on Sunday, when she went to church, something had shifted. People who usually just nodded politely sought her out. They hugged her. They shared their own stories of similar treatment. The pastor mentioned her in his sermon, not by name, but everyone knew. He talked about dignity and respect and standing up for what's right, and Margaret felt the whole congregation's eyes on her. "You did good," Beverly whispered to her after the service. "You stood there and took it and didn't let them break you. That's important. People need to see that." Monday brought a call from Patricia Hernandez. True to her word, the bank manager updated Margaret on the actions taken. Derek had been terminated. His pattern of behavior, once investigated, showed this wasn't the first time he'd treated customers poorly, just the first time it had been recorded. Jessica had been placed on probation and would undergo extensive training before working with customers again. The entire branch was scheduled for mandatory bias training, and the bank was implementing new protocols for handling customer concerns. "We're also creating a customer advocacy position at each branch," Patricia told her. "Someone specifically trained to handle situations where customers feel they've been treated unfairly. And Mrs. Thompson, if you'd be willing, we'd like to invite you to speak to our staff about your experience. Not right away, only if and when you feel ready. But your perspective could help our employees understand the real impact of their actions." Margaret said she'd think about it. She wasn't sure she wanted to relive that day, to stand in front of people and talk about how small she'd felt. But maybe it would help. Maybe it would keep it from happening to someone else. Tuesday brought the biggest surprise. A delivery arrived at her door. Flowers, beautiful and elaborate, with a card. Margaret opened it with shaking hands. The card read, "Mrs. Thompson, I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about you and wanted to check in. You showed incredible grace and strength last week. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. With respect and admiration, Vin." There was a phone number at the bottom, handwritten. Margaret held the card for a long time, touched by the gesture in a way she couldn't quite articulate. He'd remembered. In his busy life, with everything he had going on, he'd remembered her. She called the number that afternoon. A pleasant woman answered, introducing herself as Vin's assistant. Margaret identified herself, and the woman's voice warmed immediately. "Mrs. Thompson, Vin asked me to make sure you had everything you needed. He wanted me to check that the bank was following through on their promises. How are you doing?" They talked for 15 minutes. Margaret learned that Vin had been contacted by multiple media outlets wanting interviews about the incident, but he'd declined them all.
"He said it wasn't his story to tell," the assistant explained. "He said if they wanted to know what happened, they should ask you and respect whatever decision you made about speaking publicly." Margaret appreciated that more than she could say.
In a world where everyone seemed eager for their moment in the spotlight, Vin had stepped back and let her control her own narrative. The following week, Cheryl came to visit as promised. They spent the weekend together, cooking, talking, watching old movies. Cheryl was still angry about what had happened, still wanted her mother to sue the bank, make a bigger statement. But Margaret wasn't sure that's what she wanted. "I just want things to get better," she told her daughter as they sat on the porch Saturday evening. "I want that bank to change. I want other people not to go through what I went through. But I don't want revenge. That's not who I am." "You're too good, Mama," Cheryl said, but she was smiling. "Not too good. Just tired. I'm 73 years old, baby. I've been fighting one way or another my whole life. Sometimes the fight is about making noise and demanding change. Sometimes it's just about maintaining your dignity and hoping your example means something." 2 weeks after the incident, Margaret received another call from Patricia. The bank wanted to issue a public statement about the incident and the changes they were implementing. Would Margaret approve? "We want to do this right," Patricia said. "We don't want to use your story without your permission, but we also think it's important for people to know that we're taking this seriously, that real changes are being made." Margaret agreed with conditions. She didn't want her full name used publicly. She wanted the focus to be on the systemic changes, not on her as an individual. Patricia agreed immediately. The statement went out that afternoon. Pacific Trust. Bank acknowledged that discrimination had occurred at their downtown Los Angeles branch. They outlined the actions taken, including employee termination, new training protocols, the establishment of customer advocacy positions, and a system-wide review of policies and procedures. They committed to ongoing efforts to ensure all customers were treated with dignity and respect. The response was mixed, as Margaret expected. Some people praised the bank for taking responsibility. Others said it was too little, too late. Some pointed out that it had taken a viral video and a celebrity's intervention for anything to happen at all. Margaret read the comments when Cheryl wasn't around, trying to understand the larger conversation her experience had sparked. A month passed. Then 2. Life slowly returned to normal, or a new version of normal. Margaret still banked at Pacific Trust, though she always felt a flutter of anxiety walking through those doors. But Helen was always warm and welcoming, and Patricia made a point of saying hello whenever she saw Margaret. The bias training happened, and Patricia invited Margaret to observe one session. She sat in the back of the room and watched as employees, including some who'd been working there the day of the incident, went through scenarios and discussions about implicit bias, about how assumptions could harm customers, about the importance of treating every person with respect, regardless of how they looked. It wasn't perfect. Some employees seemed more engaged than others, but it was something. It was a start. 3 months after the incident, Margaret received an unexpected letter. It was from a young black woman named Jasmine who lived in Chicago. She'd seen the video of what happened and wanted to share her own story. She'd experienced similar treatment at various businesses throughout her life and had always felt too intimidated to speak up. But seeing Margaret stand her ground,